So I think we will start right now. Hello everyone, my name is Jakub Zalewski and I'm an associate at legalplay.pl, which is a video games law practice at the Polish law firm Kobylańska-Lewoszewski-Mednis, Intellectual Property Student Association of the University of Warsaw asked me to moderate today's event. And I gladly said yes, because I used to be a member of the board of the association when I was a student, and I still try to support them in their initiatives even today. But enough about me. We are all here because Cyberpunk releases in 3 days, and you are probably as excited as I am. Some of you have probably pre-ordered the game already, or even preloaded the game, or even read the reviews that came out 2 hours ago. It's been almost 8 years since the famous first teaser trailer for the game. So it took a lot of time and effort of hundreds of people to create this game. And as you can imagine, it was an immense challenge from the legal point of view as well. And this is what we will talk about with our guests from Queen Mary University of London and from CD Projekt Red. Before I introduce our guests, let me give thanks to Steve Terrett from British Law Centre. Without his support, IP Student Association wouldn't be able to have this event in such a scale. Thank you, Steve. Steve would like to say a few words right now.
Well, thank you very much, Kuba. Very, very few words. As Kuba said, I'm Steve Terrett. I'm the Director of Studies at the British Law Centre. And I could speak for hours about the BLC and our courses, but don't worry, I won't, because I know why you're here, you know why you're here, and it's certainly not because you want to listen to me speak for ages about our course. So I know I'm standing in between you and the main event, and I will do a one-man Brexit and stand aside in just a second and allow you to enjoy the rest of the evening, which I'm sure is going to be great. But before I do, I'd just like to add my own very sincere thanks to our guests from Queen Mary University in London, CD Projekt Red, and a huge thank you to the Koło Naukowe Własności Intelektualnej, which is a real mouthful for a Brit to say. It's been a real pleasure collaborating with you, and I hope it's the first of many times. So the final thanks is, of course, to you. I think we're at the stage now of COVID that many people are suffering from having spent so much time in front of their phones and laptops. I am convinced that I have developed a new medical condition called hyperzoomia, caused by excessive internet meetings. But tonight, this is different, and you can all feel it. This is a pleasure, not an obligation. And I, for one, certainly can't wait. So thanks for joining us. It's difficult to see who's in the audience because there are so many people there. But just in case, allow me to single out one person and say, Keanu, thanks for joining us. And thanks to you all. Have an absolutely fantastic evening. I will go now. Bye.
Thank you, Steve. So now let me introduce our guests. From Queen Mary University of London, we are joined by Dr. Gaetano De Mita, who is a senior lecturer in international intellectual property law at Queen Mary University of London, and also obviously a video games enthusiast. He is also the director of the Institute for Interactive Entertainment Law and Policy, the editor-in-chief of the Interactive Entertainment Law Review, and the organizer of the More Than Just a Game conference series. The last one of these conferences, by the way, before the coronavirus hit everywhere, was organized here in Warsaw. Yeah, that's cool. We are also joined by Dr. Michaela MacDonald, who is a lecturer at the Queen Mary University of London. Her main research interests focus on the legal, regulatory, and societal effects of disruptive technologies. She also works at Moorcrofts LP as a consultant in a project researching the development of a legal contract management system that uses artificial intelligence. From Queen Mary University of London, we are also joined by Alexander Alexandru, who is a PhD student at the university. His research thesis is entitled "The Interactive Entertainment Industry and Successive Creativity, Remastering Copyright for Video Games and Successive Works." Fun fact, he was also named Best Oralist during the legal challenge for the Games Industry Law Summit in Vilnius in 2019. We are also joined by Michael Danford, who is a PhD student at Queen Mary as well. His research thesis is called "The Funworks Problem After 20 Years, a Critical Reassessment." His studies focus on the impact of the copyright law on fandoms and other interest-based communities. Our last guest from the Queen Mary University of London is Salvatore Fasciana. He's a PhD student at Queen Mary as well. His research thesis is entitled "The Implementation of Gamers' Bill of Rights Within the Current Interactive Entertainment Industry." In his research, he attempts to draft a bill of rights for gamers, with each right representing one of the main challenges faced by the interactive entertainment industry. Last but not least, one of our guests is Rafał Kłoczko. Rafał is the Chief Counsel Business, IP and Privacy at CD Projekt Red. His job is to make sure that laws do not get in the way of the creativity for all the developers at CD Projekt Red.
Hi guys.
Yeah, and fun fact, Rafa was also head of our IP student association back in ancient times.
Somewhere around the 1930s, I think.
So before Alex, Michael, and Salvatore will start their presentation, both Kacper Monasterski of the IP Student Association and Gaetano Demita from Queen Mary University of London would like to say a few words. So we'll start with Kacper. Kacper, go ahead.
Okay. We are very honored that we have the opportunity to organize this event. We are glad that after more than just a game on the road in Warsaw, we are continuing our cooperation with the Center of Commercial Law Studies team of Queen Mary University of London. We also thank Steve Terrett for supporting our event by the British Law Center of the University of Warsaw, and thank Kuba, who is the moderator of today's event. Jakub is former board member of our organization and has been actively supporting us for several years. That's it for us. I give Jakub the floor. I give Kuba and Gaetano the floor again. Thank you.
Thank you, Kacper. Now, Gaetano, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I don't want to continue with this random introduction, but I just really want to thank you for organizing it. The last More Than Just a Game in Barca was amazing, and I'm really sorry we're not there in person. And I want just to say a couple of words on what we're doing. I mean, you can guess it. We are now, the Center of Commercial Law Studies is 40 years old this year, 2020. I mean, one of the reasons to celebrate 2020, otherwise it didn't go much well. But we have a mission of being always at the forefront of teaching and research. And we are doing it again now with interactive entertainment law. We have 3 courses: interactive entertainment law, interactive entertainment transaction, and this year we're launching esports law. What we want to do is actually underline the importance of this area of the law that has always been overlooked. Now, thanks to the increased success of video games, or the constant appearance on the news, and the fact that everyone plays them, and if they say they don't, they're probably lying. We have a chance to actually have serious research and teaching in the field. And we started with the course, we launched an international series of conferences, we launched a peer-reviewed journal, but what we wanted to do now, and this is why the Cyberpunk project started, we want to really showcase how amazingly complex, fascinating, and fun is to study and do research in this field. And I want to thank you, Rafael, because he's today 3 days before launch. He's joining us tonight, and I have to also to thank him for Cyberpunk. That was the perfect video game to analyze from an AP perspective, and I'm really proud that now. However, I mean, Cyberpunk is going to be on the reading list of a lot of law courses, and I'm kind of happy about that. Pretty sure marketing doesn't care, but I'm personally happy that now is a legal analysis piece. So I'm not going to say anything more. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. So now let's begin the main course. As I have said before, the presentation on tonight's topic would be given by Alex, Michael, and Salvatore. After the presentation, they will be joined by Michela, Gaetano, and Rafa during the Q&A session. If you have any questions, type them in the chat, and we will read them out loud and answer them. Probably due to the time constraints, we would not be able to answer all of them, but we will try our best. Alex, Michael, Salvatore, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And yep, here we go with the slides that we've got for you tonight. My name's Mike Dunford. With me are Alex and Salvo. And what we're going to be talking to you tonight about is what Gaetano said, basically. What we're going to try to do for you is use Cyberpunk 2077 as a platform to illustrate some of the legal challenges that we've got in this developing area of law going forward, and hopefully to give some of you an idea of where you can go in your own research, what you can do with this field going forward. And besides, I mean, you know, it's either we do this or we sit here looking at the next slide, waiting and waiting for the clock to actually tick over to December 10th. I've got that one going live on the screen next to me, but it's still not working out. Anyway, what we're going to be talking about today, as everybody knows, but just to refresh, is Cyberpunk 2077, which is a video game, obviously, that was developed by CDPR. It's based on the Cyberpunk 2020 game, which for those of you who aren't familiar is a good old school pen and paper role-playing franchise that was developed by our Telsorian Games way back in the day. Salvo is going to pick up next and talk about some of this general area of law and some of the issues that come up. Alex will then kind of go over some very specific issues that come up with video games, in particular involving things like the engine and the storyline. And then at the end, I've got a couple of oddball areas of law that we'll discuss. So with that, Salvo.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, what we are trying to do here today, this evening, and good evening actually, is it's a complex activity because we are here trying to define Cyberpunk 2077. It's not such an easy task because it's not easy to describe a video game. A video game is first a medium, but it's also a commodity. It's also treated and marketed as a service. We know that the increasing gamification of economy is involving also gaming industry, and this allowed the developers and developers and producers to basically provide players with games which are constantly updated and which basically offer entertainment and engagement for a longer time. The game as a service is a new business model which basically allows developers and publishers to monetize a game even after their date of release. But what we know that gaming is big. It's big because it's the first creative industry, bigger than film and music industry combined. It's probably hitting a $200 billion profit by the next couple of years. And of course, that's why we are here. It's heavily IP reliant. On top of that, I would like to tell you in the previous slide, there was like the gaming industry value chain. And the game industry value chain also shows something interesting, that all the actors that you can see, they have different activities and position considering the different type of market we are observing. For instance, we know that publishers, they have a paramount position in current console and PC market. But for instance, in the mobile market, where the cost of publishing, distributing, and producing a video game are lower, distributors have the dominant position in some way. However, we can try to describe a video game from an intellectual property perspective. And in this sense, we can say that a video game is a complex work of authorship, which include several sets of intellectual property rights, mainly copyright, but also trademarks, trade secrets, patents, and registered design. Then, of course, some of them, they are perceivable, they are visible during the game experience, while others, they don't. At this point, it's possible to use intellectual property rights to provide you with a definition, maybe with a framework, using, I would like to use a multi-layered approach. Basically, the first layer of any video game is the code, is the engine, which basically, sorry for being very simple in this sense, but it's a sequence of numbers and letters. So for this reason, is treated as a literary work, and then is protected by copyright most of the time. Then we have a second layer, which is given by the bundle, the audiovisual bundle. That basically is what you can see in the game, the in-game art, sounds, graphics, sound, voice, characters, everything you can actually see and perceive in the game, also some patents sometimes. A third layer, which frame the video game more as a product in terms like in trade secrets and trademark. And the fourth layer that is not defining the video game per se itself, but it tries to open a new area, the area of the interaction between the game system, and players. So at this point, you can basically, it's normal that such contextual presence of all these intellectual property assets and rights may be a problem, especially when it comes with the protection and classification of such complex work. Because we all know that all these elements, they need to find, they are not protectable per se, so they need to find and meet, actually they need to meet classification and protection criteria in each jurisdiction where the game is available. And we all know that the strong international vocation of a video game, I can play with people from South Korea and Brazil, from Italy easily. So this gives us the idea of how hard it is in terms of copyright and protection and classification in terms of copyright. But on top of that, for instance, one of the biggest difference in terms of US and European system, for instance, is in terms of copyright law, is the fixation requirement, according to which in the US you are not eligible for copyright, at least your work is not fixed in a medium expression, thanks to which the work can be perceived and communicated. But of course, we all know that IP laws in general are strongly territorial, and they reflect population, culture, and instances. So even in Europe, there are some difference between jurisdiction and jurisdiction. But at the moment, I just propose the idea that a video game is a complex work of authorship, but maybe we can treat a video game as a single work of authorship. In this sense, a single work of authorship, I mean, generally speaking, the closest definition that may frame a video game as a single work of authorship is basically a sequence of images which are intended to be shown. But as we understand here, we are missing something important. We are missing the interactivity. Interactivity means the main reason why we are all here, continuous moment of tension and resolution which are solved by the players. And this is why we are playing video games, because we are interacting with the system. However, generally speaking, we can say that some jurisdictions like Argentina, Italy, Israel, they look at video game as a software because of the inevitable software implementation behind the video game. While other jurisdictions, they opt for a distributive approach by saying that you can protect a video game only if you protect the element which make the video game. In this sense, it's clear that the single elements which compose a video game, when they are put all together, they create something different. They create a different multimedia experience. I just said that all these games like Horizon Zero Dawn, Fortnite, The Witcher 3, I think this is Dark Souls first. Yes, the first Dark Souls. They are software from a jurisdiction. Italy, I already said it. And actually, from a business point of view, they are software as well. And they are software which terms and conditions of use are included within a legal contract which is named End Users License Agreement, EULA for France, which I believe is the most unread contract in the history of mankind. We have very nice example of EULA. For instance, Apple was warning the user to not use their iTunes software in order to manufacture any nuclear or biological weapons. It's good, but Ubisoft was going very deep in asking that not use the software, Far Cry 3 in particular, against the morality of the law. That still I really struggle to understand. And but my favorite is Game Station, which basically you were granting them an option to claim your immortal soul, if you only believe that you had an immortal soul, of course. But jokes aside, an end user license agreement is nothing more than a legal contract, and it has many functions. One of the first functions, for instance, is manage and limit all the potential liabilities that publishers may encounter in the context of the game. Another one might be clarify and highlights compliance with some regulatory body, like, for instance, consumer protection law. But one, and this is one of the most important reason that you should bear in mind today, this evening, is that the end user license agreement ensures that the publisher has the right to protect its interests in the context of the game. In other words, without the end user license agreement, we wouldn't have any gaming market, because nobody would spend any penny in developing any game, because there would not be any legal instrument to protect their investment in terms of social, in terms of human and technological resources. But the function I would like to show this evening to you is that a video game, an end user license agreement establishes some rules that say what you can do and what you cannot do within a video game and with a video game software. Because guys, I want to make clear about this. I would just take yourself like 2 seconds to think about your collection, your video game collection at home, even also digital collection. Maybe some of you have some nice shelves with some very nice status action figure. I have bad news, because you own nothing. You barely own the box where there is the CD or the Blu-ray, and of course you own the CD and the Blu-ray in terms of electronic medium, not of course in terms of the software included. Because when we play a video game, means that we agree to this end user license agreement, and it means that we will receive a limited, revocable, not sub-licensable, and non-exclusive license to use the platform and the game and the software. This means something important. First, I'm here to show you that in the context of video games and specific kind of video games, end users license agreement may have a double nature. We can say a double nature, where basically the first one is an intellectual property commercialization instrument, and the second one, that is less traditional, we can say, is a governance instrument that we will look after. As an intellectual property commercialization instrument, license agreement is nothing more than licensing. Licensing together with assignment, spin-off, joint venture is one of the tools we have in order to monetize our IP portfolio. In this case, we have Johnny Silverhand, who is granting the option to use. He's granting the use to Katsuya Mishima, the use of some intellectual property rights, and Katsuya Mishima is giving them back a monetary compensation. This is more or less the legal relationship we have between us. So we are Katsuya Mishima, is kind of good news for me, and any other publisher we encounter at the moment. Because remember, guys, every game we ever played in our life does mean that we agreed to an end user license agreement. But giving more details about this product license in terms of video game license, we have a limited, revocable, not sub-licensable, and non-exclusive license. Of course, the non-exclusivity is the only option available here for a business opportunity, because I might guess that CDPR is interested in negotiating further license with other individuals to get some money. Of course, we don't have any sub-licensing rights here, means that the copy of the game. Once it's activated, it's ours. We cannot sub-licensing the license, and is limited and revocable. I would like to read it together because the use of the software is limited. It means that in the event we infringe the license, the publisher is entitled to revoke or suspend our license. In this sense, I would like to go in details and say, okay, but which are the activities that can trigger this kind of I would like to call it power to exclude, because here we have a clear statement. If you violate or assist others in violating the limitation set forth below, you agree that you will wall or in part or under any circumstance and following. And we have a set of activities. For instance, first range of activities involve derivative works, copying a game, translating, reverse engineering, disassembling. Also, we have also very nice images of a Duff beer that Mike will talk about more later. A second range of behavior that can trigger the power to exclude are those activities which rely on the engagement, on the interaction between very skilled player and the code. Basically, when this player, they interact with the game, with the source code, they can create some interesting elements, some cheats, bots, hacks. I don't want to talk about this in details because Alex will do it later. But these are very, very relevant part, and this is actually a very one of the most interesting part to see in terms of behavior that they are not allowed. In terms of other type of activity, we have commercial use of video game, like for instance, playing video game in a commercial establishment, or for instance, performing game service, including without limitation account boosting or account leveling up an account for a friend, or of course, place any wager on the outcome of the game. Ahead, if we go ahead, we find any different kind of activities which are forbidden, which trigger this power to exclude. Esports. You cannot use this game for any esport competition. Of course, you cannot use this game, you cannot run this game in any external cloud computing service. Data mining. You do not use any instrument which is able to gather data and information from the service. And duplicated items. You cannot duplicate the items. I don't know if you are familiar with Pokemon a long time ago, but long time ago, if you had a Game Boy Advance, you were able to duplicate Master Ball using this sort of glitch, turning off the Game Boy. This was a behavior that theoretically could trigger the power to exclude. Now, I'm sure that all these activities that we read broadly, of course, you and we can think that they are totally legitimate. Because, guys, the first element we need to think is that the end-user license agreement serves a very important purpose, providing rights to the publisher in order that he can protect his interest in the game. But still, even though most of them, they are legitimate, some of them, they look like it seems that they are going beyond the scope of the license in some way. In this sense, it's important because not all the games are the same. Not all the games are the same because there are some games which offer a wider range of activities to player. There are some games like World of Warcraft and MMOs, MMORPG, where players socialize, communicate. Basically, they have the same cultural, social, and economic instances they have in their real life, but they are bringing them in a virtual life. So in this context, a EULA looks more like a governance instrument, we can say a self-given constitution, where virtual inhabitants or citizen players, they need to comply, because if they don't, they basically stop to exist, virtually speaking. And a governance instrument means that video game is now the epicenter of a new, what we can call media convergence. A video game is not what was 25 years ago. What we can do now with video game, it's incredible compared to what we can do long time ago. We can socialize while playing, we can socialize sharing content, and doing a vast set of activities that were totally unexpected. And this means that this interlinking between new communication protocols and in technological protocols shapes something new. And the good news, and that gamers, players like us, we are the epicenter of this kind of media convergence, because we are empowered we are not consumer anymore. We are not just passive user. We are athletes, broadcaster, co-authors, streamers, influencer. There is something more here, especially because the interaction between the game system and the user becomes something very, very, very complicated. And at this point, very broadly speaking, I would like to give you just a few examples where the governance is happening. Few layers where you can see this governance. But first, I have to highlight that there is no publisher that is dominate players, but they are just try to govern them, because governance means recognize players' agency, while domination means crushing them. No, there is not such this. And as we can see, there is a governance in terms that they are trying to deal with players' creativity, publishers. They are trying, and they are doing a lot of efforts, especially compared to what was happening even 5-6 years ago. So is there a way to actually govern fairly players and without crushing their economic expectation, if they have it, if there are some? For instance, a first layer of governance is the power to exclude. I repeat again, but the power to exclude is one of the strongest elements in favor of the publisher, because they can discretionarily basically suspend a license because they believe this is the right things to do, and that's all. Take it or leave it. A second layer of the governance, for instance, is given by the code and the rules of the game. The code and the rules of the game, basically, they shape your behavior inside the game. A game can encourage some kind of gameplay and discouraging other kind of gameplay, and you are basically forced to behave in some way because the rules and the code is the law of the physics of the video game in some way. Another layer of governance is a different type of governance, of course. It's a privacy, datification of players of the industry. It's incredible. It's getting many advantages to the industry of both of players, because I don't know if you noticed, guys, but many games now, they totally reflect the players' expectation, because they know what we like, and if we don't like it, they will change. For instance, Crucible, the first game from Amazon. There are disciplines like game analytics and game user research, which are basically designed to understand our behavior inside the game in order to provide a better service for us. Of course, there are some other issues there, but we have no time to speak about this. Another important aspect here is the free speech governance. It happened, I would just to clarify this aspect by telling you this small story about this player. It was Wing Chang, I'm sorry for the bad pronunciation. He was a grandmaster of a Hearthstone game, card game. And during a tournament, I think a year ago, he basically publicly declared during the streaming of this tournament, he declared his support to the Hong Kong protest, and he got banned from the game, from the tournament, and from other tournaments. This is a type of chilling effect of free speech that is kind of dangerous in some way, but this is another kind of governance. Another, and the most important actually, because as you will see, Mike and Alex will talk about this, is the player's creativity. As I said, we are empowered as active user, as active consumer. We are gamers, so we can interact with the system in a very different way. The main problem here is that because they need to protect their interests and they need to protect themselves from the wide range of activities we can be involved with, they need to limit our creativity in some way. And as you can see from the game content, for instance, we are not allowed, basically, according to the end user license agreement, to create user-generated content using the game content we find in the game. You can create any work of authorship based on the game content. And as you can see, the game content, it's kind of has a vast definition. So basically, it's everything. But as I said, they are slowly and increasing recognizing players' agency. That's why many publishers, they are now including specific type of guidelines and policies where they accept the use of their intellectual property from specific use. But how, for instance? The first one is very immediate and very, very famous and popular is for streaming. For instance, they allow players to stream and monetize, passive monetizing thanks to donation and advertising revenue. But what I find very, very interesting as well is that the publisher encourage players' creativity. In the same guidelines, you can find that they encourage to be creative, to find something new and not be trivial in some way. And at the same point, as you can see from the next slide, here you can find some very example of nice creativity of players. Minecraft, as you know, is one of the best games that can express players' creativity. But according to the further slide, you can see that basically they, of course, they need to protect themselves, and they want the right to use their work without risk to getting sued, of course, and without getting any clear authorization from you. Basically, what I've just showed you guys is kind of a perfect imbalance in some way. It's evident that we are having there is a control. Publishers are exerting in the context of gaming, but it's a necessary control. But it's perfect because we are all here. We are enjoying this medium, and what we are trying to make clear here is that the game and what emerged from the game are different things. And as Mike and Alex will tell you more now. Thank you very much.
Salvo, before we go forward with my part of the presentation, I wanted to go back to the term you used, games as a service. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think it implies as a term? And what's the difference between, let's say, games as a service and a game as a product? What do you think the difference between those two terms is?
At the moment, thanks, Alex. At the moment, I think that the only big difference that comes to my mind when I think about the difference between game as a service and game as a product is the monetization approach they have. Because most of the time when we talk about as a product, we think about as a game which you pay for play. So it's a pay to play. While the game is a service, sometimes is implied the concept where you basically sometimes play for free, and then they start to monetize the game while updating it with new events, with new feature, with new characters, and whatever. What I'm concerned about this difference, I mean, of course, the legal difference in terms of product and service, yes, there are, but what I'm concerned is about the way, the models of monetization, because these are the ones that we should be concerned about, because including an unfair on something that can monetize a game, but can ruin the gameplay, can ruin the experience, it's something that we should be concerned about in some way. This is what I think about games as a service and game as a product in some way at the moment, just very specifically on the monetization approach, that this is where we should be careful about after the loot boxes case, you know.
And Mike, do you have anything to add?
I was wondering a little bit, this is something that'll come up, of course, a little bit later on, but on the side of privacy, Salvo,
yeah,
we know that obviously, you know, all the games companies have their privacy policies, which, you know, give their GDPR compliance to the gamer. But is there any way, or should they be thinking in the contract sense about how to handle things like obligations that one gamer who is streaming may have to other gamers in the privacy sense?
Oh yeah, with the GDPR, it was a very step ahead in terms of privacy, but it's also a very complicated enigma to solve in some way. I think that in terms of privacy compliance, I think that technology may help a lot here. Taking aside, of course, the liabilities and responsibilities, we is entitled to respect the GDPR compliance. But for instance, one of the first risk I can think about is like the unexpected sharing of personal data when you, for instance, you stream, because while you are partying with somebody else, you maybe during the stream you can share their accounts, and you don't want to do it because they didn't give their consent to do this, and this is a clear infringement of GDPR. But in this case, technology can help, because many games they already implemented a sort of streaming mode. And the streaming mode will basically change automatically all the name and personal data we can say that they are displaying the screen. And of course, this doesn't take off any problem in terms of GDPR compliance. But technology might be very helpful, especially with privacy, with this kind of little tricks that can help actually, because you totally override the problem because there is no personal data to share because it's anonymized in some way.
All right. Thank you, Salvo.
Thanks, Alex.
Now, the following section has two parts. In part one, I will break down video games into their two main video game components and explain what they are. That's the video game content and the game engine. And in part 2, I will be using Cyberpunk 2077 to explain the different ways in which these components can affect the life cycle of a video game, how the player community can use both to add further value to such a complex IP product with user-generated content. And I will conclude by sharing some thoughts on what that may mean for IP management. The video game content, or VGC for short, is an umbrella term that includes all the individual ingredients and audiovisual works that go into a video game. To put it simply, anything you see, hear, or read while playing a video game will generally fall under the VGC category. This includes things such as game and concept art, graphics, 3D models and environments, characters, music, and so on. All these may be eligible for protection under copyright, provided they meet the minimum requirements for protection. The VGC is generally produced by the creative department of a developer studio. Think of graphical artists, designers, animators, musicians, writers, and so on. It is common for developers to license or otherwise acquire the rights to use existing content from other sources to create the VGC, much like how you get a movie or a series from a book, for example. While this saves development time and gives the studio access to an established audience, it is equally common to create everything in-house and avoid paying things such as licensing fees or royalties to third parties. Cyberpunk 2077's thematic premise is based on our Tolstoyan Games role-playing pen and paper game, Cyberpunk 2020. CD Projekt Red acquired the rights from Tolstoyan to produce the video game content for their Cyberpunk project. This allowed CDPR to use the characters, settings, environments, stories, locations, and so on to create much of the content for Cyberpunk 2077 and expand the Cyberpunk universe in general. In that sense, Cyberpunk 2077 can be considered a licensed derivative of Cyberpunk 2020. Mike, I believe you have some further insight on IP in fictional universes and Cyberpunk.
Yes, thanks, Alex, and thanks for letting me butt into your part of the presentation here. I just want to talk about the development of the story world a little bit, because I think it's an area, again, where we've got some IP questions that are a little bit free-floating. If we look at what Cyberpunk 2077 has done, we see that the plot and most of the characters for the game are new. They're entirely CDPR's creations. They're not part of existing 2020 storylines. Johnny Silverhand and Alt Cunningham are characters that have come out of the pre-existing work, but even those have been kind of brought along some. So, I mean, we've got this game, which is set in 2077. The tabletop game set decades and decades earlier. So this might, for some of you, raise a question of why would CDPR want to acquire the entire body of IP that goes with Cyberpunk 2020 instead of just taking it as an inspiration and doing their own game based on it. So the question that we have really is, what are they acquiring exactly? And what we're seeing is what they're acquiring really is all of this. The world of Cyberpunk 2020 is very much a detailed, rich, textured universe. It may have been described almost entirely in text, but converting something from text to a graphical format is a little bit easier sometimes than coming up with something from scratch. So they got the role-playing game, but the role-playing game is really only part of it. There was this whole series of other books, and you know, I think I got most of the covers of the various works that are part of the Cyberpunk universe canon on this slide, but I probably missed a couple along the way. And each of these works, as these next two pictures show, give them things that they can bring in that they can potentially just make relatively easy use of for things like later DLC, in the case of the various kinds of cyberware that you see on the screenshot to the left, or in the case of the gangs of Night City, you can see that the Voodoo Boys are already built in as a gang. There's something that could be developed fairly early. So they're acquiring this whole corpus of works that gives them access to this entire universe. But what does that mean in an intellectual property sense? I mean, they've acquired the characters and the plot, but they've also got the companies, the brands, which I'll come back to in more detail later, the locations, history, the items. So they've got this texture and this immersion, but how do you protect this in intellectual property terms? And I've done a little bit of research on this, and in my own personal view, you almost really have to look at the intellectual property that you want to protect for something like this as being the universe itself. I mean, sure, you want to protect the storyline and the plot, but that's, almost a small part of the whole. And we can already see that CDPR is making extensive use out of the rest of the universe. We've got a Trauma Team comic series that seems to be quite distant from the main storyline. We've got the anime that's coming out. There's all kinds of things that are coming down along the line. So this leads to the question, though, can you actually copyright a universe? Is a universe a creative work? Or is it something that has to be protected by trademark or by a mix? In the US, I think you could probably argue that it's protectable, but along the lines of a fictional character. But that's, first of all, that's something I've only looked at under US law. And second, even there, the doctrine is not entirely necessarily clear. So I think this is another thing that people who are going to be working in this area should be thinking about as you go forward. Some of these questions can really come into play. So with that, Alex, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now moving on to the more technical side of things like the game engine. The game engine is a very important component and a fundamental part of video game development. It is perhaps the most important creative software tool in a developer's arsenal. A video game engine is basically a software program specifically developed for video game production and is responsible for things such as physics simulation, graphics rendering, music and sound generation, based on video game content fed into it. They are very complex and expensive to develop and are also independently protectable programs. Game engines are used and maintained by the technical department of a developer studio, such as game AI and graphics programmers, as well as software and audio engineers. A developer can choose whether to create its own engine or license one from a third party. Many independent developers or smaller studios that do not have big budgets tend to license an engine as opposed to creating one from scratch. It is also worth mentioning that an engine can be used to create a multiplicity of video games based on different genres, art styles, and gameplay mechanics. CDPR developed its own game engine, the Red Engine, during the development of their second video game entry to the Witcher franchise. They have been upgrading and adding to it ever since with high fidelity graphics, improvements to animation, physics simulation, and so on. The latest iteration of the engine, the Red Engine 4, has been specifically developed for Cyberpunk 2077. It apparently makes it easier for the studio to create the game with the first-person perspective and introduces various graphical upgrades that allow for the development of next-generation assets, graphics, and effects. In fact, every aspect of the Red Engine has reportedly been upgraded for this specific project. CDPR then, by heavily investing in developing, maintaining, and upgrading its in-house engine, has developed a powerful software creation tool that is customizable and upgradable according to their needs. This allows for increased creative freedom and flexibility when they work on their projects. Most importantly, however, CD Projekt Red does not have to license or pay royalties to any third parties, relying on them for using their tools. So developing an in-house video game engine can be a long-term investment for a studio, as it can produce multiple video games with it, with the only thing having to be changed and produced separately being the video game content. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, the Red Engine was originally developed for The Witcher 2. It was also used for the highly successful Witcher 3 and is now being used for Cyberpunk 2077. So it is important for a studio to be able to protect their creative software as much as it is important to protect their video games. I would personally go a step further and argue that it is actually more important to ensure that there is sufficient protection for the engine. They can also, for example, choose to start licensing their engine to third-party developers, but CDPR has not yet done so as far as we are aware. Video games can benefit from a long life cycle, stemming from expansions to the base game, elaborating on the story, gameplay, and so on, something that CDPR has done for the previous video games and has plans to do for Cyberpunk 2077. In fact, CDPR is reportedly planning to announce future expansions right after the game's launch. There also may be subsequent entries to the franchise, such as Cyberpunk 2078, or since the game is set in a first-person perspective, that is, you view the world through the main character's point of view, CDPR may develop a mode or a spin-off version of the game for virtual reality, please. They can also introduce new game modes such as multiplayer, that is playing online in cooperation with other players or pitted against each other. Again, something that CDPR is reportedly planning to release at some point after the launch of the video game. And this is actually a very important mode as it can contribute to the longevity of the franchise and allow the developer to explore additional monetization options in the future. And finally, the video game content can be used as the basis to produce additional works, such as movies, animated series, comic books, and so on. In fact, an original Netflix animated series called Cyberpunk Edge Runners is already in the works, even though the video game is yet to be released. Finally, if humankind somehow makes it and still around in actual 2077, CDPR may choose to remake or remaster Cyberpunk with the technology available at the time. Now, this is looking far ahead into the future, but we saw this happen with many video games and video game franchises recently to a varying success. So this may very well be a possibility for a developer or CDPR of the future. It will therefore not be surprising to tell you that a range of spin-offs, both in terms of audiovisual and literary works, will be appearing after the game's release. One last thing I'd like to mention is that Geralt of Rivia, the protagonist of the Witcher series, has made an appearance in 2 other video games from 2 different developers, Capcom and Bandai Namco. Now, remember, at the start of the presentation, we pointed out that individual video game components can be eligible for copyright protection, provided they meet the minimum requirements. Without getting into too much detail, and if you're interested, Mike has published an article on this, this also applies to eligible video game characters. A developer can then choose to license the characters out to other developers, which can then use them to produce other video games, just like CDPR did with Geralt. This is actually a common practice within the industry, and the most recent example is Kratos from God of War, making an appearance as a playable character, or better, as a skin for your character in Fortnite. Now, when it comes to Cyberpunk, Keanu Reeves may complicate things a bit. Johnny Silverhand's likeness, a central figure in Cyberpunk 2077, is based on everyone's favorite Hollywood actor, which means, unlike Geralt, whose likeness is not based on anyone specifically, may present additional complications if CDPR will want to license the character out. We do not know the specifics of the business arrangement between CDPR and Keanu, but it will probably be more challenging to clear out rights if they had not preemptively discussed the possibility, especially when Keanu Reeves appears as John Wick from the movie franchise in Fortnite. While John Wick and Johnny Silverhand are 2 different characters, their likeness and names are strikingly similar. They also share Keanu's now signature hairstyle and, well, face, apart from a couple of artificial limbs. Now, these kinds of IP transactions may be manageable when it comes to dealings between first parties, but the problem here is that they're not the only ones creating content based on their video games. And this, my friends, is the perfect segue to talk about the wonderful world of user-generated content. Now, both the video game content and the game engine can be used by third parties or players for the creation of additional works, often referred to as user-generated content or UGC. There are many different types of UGC, and I will be focusing on video game modifications and machinima. These works are very popular, and creators usually use both the game engine or engine tools, as well as the video game content for their production. Now, because we are around 4,000 minutes away from Cyberpunk's official release, and I'm not counting, you're counting, and the community did not have any access to the video game content or the game engine to start creating these sort of works, I will offer examples based on CDPR's previous video games and existing works, and try to predict what to expect from the Cyberpunk community. I will also discuss some of the legal implications and legal questions these works may give rise to. Because we do not have much time, I cannot go into detail on modifications, but here's what you need to know. A video game modification, or a mod, makes changes to the video game it is based on. This is usually done through the game engine and a variety of software tools that allow the modder, a person who creates mods, to access its content and make changes. For example, a modder can add new items to a game or change existing ones, such as characters, gameplay mechanics, maps, missions, and so on. Or they can fix problems, or perceived problems for that matter, the game may have after its release. Mods are invasive in nature and can, in most cases, only exist within the video game they're based on, with some exceptions. There are many different types of mods available on different online platforms, such as Mod Database, and they can be roughly categorized under content add-ons, gameplay mechanic tweaks, unofficial patches, graphical art mods, and total conversions. For example, The Witcher 3 has thousands of mods freely available online, ranging from simple add-ons, such as, I don't know, new stylish clothes for Yennefer, a character in the game, because some people care that much, to graphical art mods, such as the HD project, that increases the graphical quality of thousands of in-game assets, characters, and effects, a sort of a community remaster of the game. I mean, look at that sheep. It's an HD now. Sorry. Now, modifications are not necessarily vetted by developer prior to their release, and in some cases, it is very hard to control their creation, distribution, and installation by users. Now, there are many benefits to modding, including making the game more enjoyable for players. If a mod is popular and successful, the game can also benefit from it, as you will need to buy the game in order to play the mod. They fix things that developers may have missed or didn't have enough time to address prior to the game's release. They can also prolong the life cycle of a video game. A good and obvious example of this is Skyrim, originally released back in 2011, which feels about, I don't know, 100 years ago, that still has an active modding community and hundreds of mods developed for it each week. Some of these mods have over 23 million unique downloads. However, it's not all fun and games. Mods can be controversial, as they do interfere with the final work and alter the way in which the developer intended for it to be played and experienced by the player. On top of that, they can also cause some legal drama. Going back to our friend Geralt from CD Projekt Red's The Witcher franchise, now, while Geralt officially appeared in 2 other video games, he was also unofficially modded in 2 others, such as Skyrim. In simple terms, a modder extracted Geralt's model from The Witcher 3 and adapted it to Skyrim's game engine. So if you download that mod, you can play as Geralt, but in Skyrim. Now, before I talk about the next set of issues, I want to quickly mention that, and as many of you already know, there's a Netflix series adaptation of The Witcher starring Henry Cavill. What you may not know is that the series is an adaptation of the book franchise and not the video game franchise. What you should know is that there was a legal dispute between CDPR and the original Witcher author over the adaptation of the video game, which has now been amicably resolved. Now, with that out of the way, here is Geralt from the video game franchise. Here is Geralt from the Netflix adaptation. And here is Geralt from the Netflix adaptation modded into the Witcher video game. Cool, right? So if you want a judgy version of Henry Cavill questioning your life choices and generally wondering what's up with you while you play The Witcher 3, well, I'm happy to let you know that you can do that with a mod. Now, the problem is that Keanu Reeves was hired to play Johnny Silverhand in Cyberpunk 2077. Henry Cavill, on the other hand, was not. Yet there he is, in his boxers, with a towel, and some abs. So with mods, we can enter some very murky legal waters, and in some cases may rekindle old disputes. This can go also the other way around. What if someone extracts Johnny's 3D character model from Cyberpunk and creates a mod for other video games without Keanu's consent? Worse still, what if someone creates a sexually explicit version of Silverhand's model, distributes it, and that results in the creation of questionable content? I, for one, after watching the John Wick franchise, would not want to anger Keanu under any circumstance. Something similar happened before with actor Elliot Page, who appeared in the video game Beyond Two Souls. So this is not a far-fetched scenario. And before I continue, in a sort of ironic turn of events, CDPR posted this apology on Facebook literally a couple of hours ago to Mr. Ugono, apologies for the pronunciation, a mixed martial artist whose likeness appears to have been used, evidently without permission, for one of the in-game characters and lore book advertisements. This goes to show that it's very hard to make sure that every type of video game content that goes in such a massive undertaking is probably cleared out of any potential IP or publicity rights claims. Even if we are about 3,834 minutes away from the game's release. Now, moving on to Machinima. I want you to watch this short video first.
In 2077, they voted my city the worst place to live in America. Main issues, sky-high rate of violence, and more people living below the poverty line than anywhere else. Can't deny it, it's all true. Everybody's wants to live here. The city's always got a promise for you. Might be a lie, an illusion. But it's there, just around the corner. And it keeps you going. It's a city of dreams. And I'm a big dreamer.
I don't know about you, but every time I listen to that music track, I get so pumped and want to get up and stay in my room. Anyway, this was World of Cyberpunk, a machinima recreation of the original Cyberpunk 2077 teaser trailer from 2018, which was about 50 years ago. It was recreated by YouTuber Duran, almost scene by scene, using characters and environments from World of Warcraft. People who play World of Warcraft, myself included, know that the game looks nothing like what we just saw. So Duran put a lot of effort, skill, and creativity in recreating Cyberpunk within World of Warcraft. So during machinima production, video game characters are repurposed as actors, in-game items and objects as props, and the game's virtual environment as a stage or a movie set for the creator to manipulate, compose, and direct in line with her creative vision. Then if we are to define machinima, they are basically computer animated works created either by using video games, video game content, the video game engine, or a combination of creative software. Many developers welcome the practice of machinima and mod production and encourage their creation. Their legal nature, however, may be a bit controversial. I prefer leaving this up for discussion, but before we do that, I would like to raise some questions. Who owns a machinima? Who should own a machinima? And when can I play World of Cyberpunk? The last thing I would like to mention is that player creativity has been widely embraced by developers over the last few years, including CDPR. This has reached a point where developers actively encourage and support the production of UGC because they recognize the value these creators and their works add to their video games. A recent example of this is the announcement of a photo mode that will be included in Cyberpunk 2077. Sorry, the music is so good. So I will personally describe this as some sort of digital photography. This is much more elaborate than simply pressing F12 to take a screenshot. To use some legalese, players will actually devote time, skill, and effort in capturing and editing a photo from Cyberpunk 2077 to the point where it may very well qualify as the player's own intellectual creation. And I believe you can imagine why this may also prove to be a contentious topic. And I think this is a perfect time to move on to Mike's presentation, which is also touching on similar issues. Before we do that though, Salvo, Mike, do you have any thoughts or any points you'd like to raise?
Well, one thing that I was wondering was, and this kind of ties Salvo's presentation, I think, together with this, We know CDPR generally has one of the more user-generated content-friendly sets of terms and conditions, but you were using language through there that was suggesting, that you see the user is contributing significant creativity and possibly generating or creating protectable works. So to what extent do you think that those clauses are actually necessary? Do gamers need to have them to be able to create?
That's an excellent question, and I really don't think we have the time. And I will try to be as brief as possible. My knee-jerk reaction to your question is no. No need for a license to create such works. My measured answer to your question is I do not know, and I do not think anyone has a 100% accurate answer, especially when you consider that we did not even begin to talk about the question of jurisdiction and their different standards for protection and exceptions. But one last thing I'd like to mention is the idea of tolerated use. These sort of works survive on the generosity of the rights holder. They tolerate UGC, they tolerate machinima. As we will see in your presentation, they tolerate Let's Play videos, and so on. That is up until the point they choose not to. And I don't know if that's right. Well, that got kind of sad and gloomy, so I think we can move on to the next part.
Alex, I have just a question for you, but it's a very about the trailer made with the World of Warcraft engine and models. Do you think there is an infringement of the World of Warcraft EULA there, or is it a copyright infringement?
I mean, that's also an interesting question, but there are many things to consider there.
You have no time to answer, man. I know.
I mean, first of all, let's start with which games and users license agreement. Are we talking about World of Warcraft? Are we talking about Cyberpunk? And then are we talking about YouTube's terms of service where this video was uploaded? So there are many layers in that. And so it's really difficult to give a simple answer, provided that we also don't have the time for it.
I know.
So, I mean, I think it's time to move on to the last part. Mike?
Absolutely. Thank you. And as I said at the start, Salvo and Alex have taken the stuff where there might be a few open questions here and there, but we're looking at the broad field as a whole. I'm just going to cover two areas real quickly to give you a taste for some of the real oddball questions that are still floating around, which are unsettled in a lot of cases, but which still have, I think, significant relevance to the industry as a whole. The first one of these is going to be influencers, and the second is going to be fictional trademarks and merchandising. On the influencer side, to start with, when we're talking about influencers, streamers obviously are high up there. And as we saw just quite recently, Cyberpunk is actually creating a game mode for streamers, which shows that, in fact, streamers are quite valued by the company. They're investing in something to protect them from the rather sudden onrush of takedowns that's been happening on Twitch. So it's clearly an area where the company gets some benefits from the influence of these streamers. YouTubers, both in the Let's Play context, and as I'll get to in a couple of minutes, kind of the lore and background and other contexts, are also quite good for jamming up hype and gaining interest. But beyond those, we also have cosplayers, I noted down here, with their Instagram accounts and their TikToks. But then, fan art and related things can also come into play a little bit, even though I won't be talking about those directly. So with streamers, what are we talking about here? Now, I really didn't want MaxTech coming after us for this presentation, so I didn't go looking to see if there was anybody I could find who was illicitly streaming a pre-release copy. We went with The Witcher instead. But one of the key things about streamers is that this is an industry. Popular streamers have millions of followers. They have tens to hundreds of thousands concurrent online. They have entire support staffs, I've discovered, helping them with this. And they're reaching 6-7 figure incomes. But there's still the open question of, is what they do infringement? And even if a company thinks it probably is, do they want to take the risk on alienating influencers? So we'll look at this a little bit more, starting with the streamers. There we go, thank you. And the issues that come up here involve with these influencers, both IP issues in the sense of copyright and trademark that I just alluded to, but then there are also some regulatory issues that are probably going to come into play, specifically those that are surrounding advertising and sponsorship, and as we mentioned a little bit earlier, privacy issues as well. So in the next slide, we have the question of copyright. We saw that just the other day, we had one of those wonderful Pantone 3945C yellow announcements pop up on CDPR's social media, giving everybody a no, not another delay heart attack. But it turns out that it was actually just a warning about pre-release streaming. The fact that they're indicating that they'll, and have actually, I've seen one person complaining already about having had things taken down, pre-release streams taken down to protect everybody else from spoilers, suggests that at least CDPR views a license as necessary for streaming. I don't know that I'm as entirely convinced. We've seen a great deal of case law, to be sure, that indicates that a player's contribution to a video game isn't a form of authorship, but we have to kind of take into account that most of that case law goes back to Pac-Man, when games were very different from massive open world games with much more choice left. So we have to kind of wonder, you know, is this like an area where there might even be a co-authorship type of interest? Is this a performance of the game? I mean, to what extent does adding the player add things? Could it be making available? To what extent are jurisdictional issues important? And all of this is before we even begin to consider questions like, is there a copyright relevant difference between doing it live as a stream and having it pre-recorded as a Let's Play? So there are a lot of IP issues open in the area of streaming, I think, even with just copyright. Trademark in streamers gets even more complex. If you call yourself a Cyberpunk streamer, is this implying that there is some sort of sponsorship from CDPR that's going on there? And even if it doesn't necessarily imply that, to what extent could a streamer scandal impact the entire brand? Again, these are not necessarily infringement questions, or not purely infringement questions, but they're certainly questions that the studios need to be aware of. Moving on from there, we have, Alex, if you don't mind, sorry. Moving on from there to the next slide, though, with the streamers, we have the other issues that pop up with these influencers. Privacy, as we've mentioned, is one of them. In the multiplayer issue, in the streaming context, who has what obligations under the GDPR? And that's the European jurisdiction. We've got other jurisdictions like California and the US that have started to enact their own set of privacy laws, which are similar to, but not identical. So these are issues that are not just unsettled, they're multi-jurisdictionally unsettled. And if I could get the next slide, thank you. So beyond that, though, and the streaming context, we've got other areas where influencers kind of come into play. And there's a lot of overlap here with user-generated content. Beyond using the game engine, there are plenty of YouTubers who do lengthy explainers on just various aspects of the background lore. I just pulled up 3 here on Arasaka. There was a whole screen of them, I think, from different YouTubers, and that's just one aspect. There were plenty of others that were going on where people were kind of taking what they've seen from the background CDPRs put out, what they found in the background from the role-playing game books, and started to give people this opportunity to kind of immerse themselves in the lore of the game ahead of time. Going beyond that, though, we've got other issues outside of even kind of these game issues, and one of those is going to be the use of cosplay. The pictures that I've got here, this first one is, cosplay of one specific character out of the game. And this is something that I got off of CDPR's the Cyberpunk game Instagram page, because they had a contest. They sponsored it. So again, this is a form of influencer that is of benefit to the industry, which means that it's also going to be an area where the IP issues that are associated will be considerable. But even there, the issues may vary a little bit from character to character. This is a specific character from the game. And on the next slide, we have somebody else who was doing cosplay pretty much as one of the versions of V, of the viewpoint character from the game. Weapon, gun, and all. But the one that follows this, we've got cosplay that's more, it's less the exact character, and it's more kind of just a general look and feel for the cyberpunk universe. Are the issues going to be the same if you're duplicating a look and a feel that goes into the game as they are if you're duplicating a precise character? And then you've also got use of cosplay in another context, and that's going to be where we have this person who was dressed up as a trauma team soldier. This is back to directly out of the game, but it's not a specific character. It's really both an NPC, but more importantly, an NPC who is part of a brand that's in the game. And this brings me from talking about influencers to talking about the second kind of offbeat area that I'd like to discuss today, which is fictional trademarks like Trauma Team. And how do you protect, in particular, a fictional mark? So I'm going to step back from Cyberpunk for a minute and let's talk about what beer does Homer Simpson drink? I mean, we all know it's Duff beer. It's a product. You know that it's a product. I know that it's a product, but you can't buy the product. So can Duff beer actually be a trademark when it's being used on beer? People have tried this all over the world. And in some cases, including Austria and I believe Germany, the EU IPO said basically, hey, 20th Century hasn't registered a trademark in Duff for beer, it's open. So they've had some more difficulty getting things off the market there. In other places like Australia, they've proceeded not on trademark, but on unfair competition and passing off causes of action. And in still other places, they've succeeded on trademark. So there's really no uniformity. And to be honest, in part, the reason these results aren't consistent is because it's not really, it's hard to say that this is a legitimate trademark, right? I mean, what is the product that Duff beer is indicating? It's certainly not an actual beer. So, that takes us to the next question, which is, of course, if it's not a trademark for beer, is it a trademark for beer merchandise? Duff beer is, in the Simpsons universe, notorious for being just overly commercialized. So naturally, everybody's overly commercialized the fake trademark, and you can get a Duff beer t-shirt, Duff beer red solo cups, and my personal favorite is the one in the middle, which is the Andy Warhol-inspired Duff beer thing. And we could probably do a 2-hour talk on parody and trademark parody and how does that affect fictional trademark parodies. But we definitely don't have the time for that right now. So I think what we're going to do is just instead, we're going to go ahead and look at what the bottom line issues are with this area and with these fictional trademarks. And that comes down to protection is messy. We've seen that in the Duff beer cases. And in part, you might be able to protect some of the trademarks with copyright. Certainly, copyright protection for trademarks has gotten more generous. But as we'll see in a minute, some trademarks are going to be simple shapes. Copyright may not be available. And then you're also going to have, for trademark side of things, issues with the trademark spectrum. As I'm sure you know, we've got, when we talk about protectability in trademarks, that whole arbitrary is good, suggestive and descriptive, like, a video game about a cyberpunk universe that's called Cyberpunk. get a little bit harder to protect in the trademark sense. But the issue there is that if you're going to come up with an in-game trademark, you're going to be using these to maintain the look and the feel of your game. So the descriptive and the suggestive marks that are bad from a trademark perspective actually become good in a sense from an in-game thing. You know that if a company is called Petrochem, you know in-game about what they're going to do. So that's an issue that kind of comes into play. Now, is it an issue that comes into play for Cyberpunk 2077? You bet. If you just look at this first screenshot, you know, I'm seeing king size up here. I'm seeing brainwash. There's a light up billboard with a picture, probably something on the pink one, definitely something on the one down below. And that's the first, that's the first picture. The second one over here with Trauma Team coming up into view in the second picture, we've got Trauma Team's mark, of course, which kind of has the generic ambulance star of life, but on that aqua background. But we've also got several more in the background. You have to. Cyberpunk as a genre relies on a heavily corporate, heavily advertised world. And we can really see that in the famous shot from the trailer where, you know, you're standing in front of a city of trademarks. Every single one of those is fictional. And every single one of those, when we talk about the game going forward, is something people can kind of latch on and might want to buy, might want to wear to kind of enhance their participation in the game. So how to protect this aspect of the IP is something that's likely to have some considerable relevance. Now, you know, that one brings us to, as we said, you know, the protection is messy and everything really gets kind of difficult with these fictional trademarks, but they're already being used in the game. There's Arasaka merchandise, and I have a legitimate Arasaka travel mug, but I've also been drinking from this one, and I won't disclose the source, but I picked this up in part to, you know, because it occurs to me that that little kind of 3 lollipop tree part of the Arasaka trademark might not be protectable by copyright. It's simple geometric shapes. The US Copyright Office might have an issue with it. So to what extent can CDPR actually keep the people on Teespring or Etsy from taking advantage of them in this sense? Miltech is another example of this. The M logo, if they haven't changed it from the original Cyberpunk lore, is very much geometric shapes. It may be recognizable to hardcore fans, but not otherwise protectable. And then we have Trauma Team, again, which is, I keep coming back to because I was an EMT way back in the day. Trauma Team's always been my favorite aspect of the Cyberpunk lore. But again, here we've got something that's ripe for cosplay, but potentially not strong in the trademark sense. It's also already being used in licensed works. So, you know, it's coming up there. I mean, you've got t-shirts and, you know, I'd love the $350 sculpture, but there's no way I'm going to buy the $350 sculpture. But it's just awesome use of the in-game brand. So, as I said, we have all of these issues that are very much unsettled with fictional trademarks. The merch is out there, but how, to what extent are the licenses necessary to make this merch? In practice, people go for it and people don't really want the lawsuits, but how is the doctrinal alignment is not necessarily quite as good. And this brings us to actually the most complicated issue. When does a fictional trademark cross the line and become a real one? Samurai is the best example of this I've ever seen. Is Samurai a fictional mark at this point, or is it a real trademark? I mean, it's Johnny Silverhand's old band. They're totally a made-up band, except that they're on Spotify. They're on YouTube. They've got an EP out. Chipping In is an awesome track, and no, I'm not listening to it before bed, getting myself amped up for the game at all. So again, we've got these things going. They're appearing on merchandise all over the place. But to what extent is this an actual trademark that can be protected as such? Now, fortunately, the logo for Samurai is much more distinctive than the simple geometric shapes, and there will be better copyright protection here. But I think the point remains. So that's where we're at on fictional trademarks. The entire area is just very much, I think, open for discussion, I guess is the best way to put it. There's a lot going on with that. And that kind of brings us to, I think we're heading toward our final discussion point, aren't we?
Yeah, I just want to be really brief because I know we don't have much time. I just want to go back to the influencers and specifically YouTubers, background YouTubers. There are many content creators that produce video essays or lore explanation videos for video games, and of course other works that have, for example, obfuscated narratives, meaning that these games do not necessarily explain the story to the player, but rather encourage them to figure it out for themselves. An obvious example of this is Dark Souls, of course, where there's not much of a narrative exposition and the player has to piece everything together to understand the story. Now, these YouTubers provide an explanation or their own interpretation of the game's narrative, or explain the ending if it's too abstract and so on. So my question is, would you consider that to be a critical review of the video game or of its story, or would you consider it to be a new work in itself and by extension a derivative of the video game?
Now we're going into these definitional questions that keep getting harder and harder. I mean, what jurisdiction are we in? How do you define critical? What is commentary? All of these questions are areas where courts kind of take their best guess, right? So, I mean, I think there's probably 3 LLM thesis topics in just that one question. I tend to view those as being commentary and criticism, and I tend to view them as being good fodder for fair use and fair dealing. But I think there's a lot of questions that are out there on that one. And hopefully maybe some of the people who are in the audience will, head over to Queen Mary for an LLM or something and take a look at some of these.
Mike, I have a question, but according to what we said today, this evening, do you think that to some extent the video game production doesn't come to an end when the game is launched, but do you think there is an ongoing process which deals with different actors of this process in some way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, CDPR's initial injection of creativity is sitting there on my hard drive, locked away, and I don't resent that at all, but it's locked away and I'll get there in a couple of days when it unlocks, but then my creativity opens up. This is when I get to go poke into the corners of Night City. This is where I get to start exploring different life paths and different options. And yeah, I mean, these are, in so many ways, what we're looking at with these creations are worlds that people want to live in, worlds that people want to draw content, create their own content in, become a part of, in many senses. So I think this kind of comes back to the whole general message that we've been trying to give you, for this today. When you get these kind of games in particular, where you have all of these options for injecting yourself into them, we can kind of give you the broad framework of the law that these companies have to look at. But we can't give you a lot of the specific answers. For those of you who are students in the area, these are the topics that are out there for you to look at. So, I mean, I guess in a way, what we're saying is that we really kind of hope that you take our presentation today and you treat it as, the way that I'm going to be treating the game. Our little bit has stopped, and now it's time for you to see what you can do with what we've given you. So, let's play.
Because guys, remember, this is more than just a game. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been impressive. Kudos to you. I'm astonished by the depth of your presentation. So now let's start the Q&A session. And I think it's got to be a short one because we don't want to stretch the time of the event. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Or if you want to elaborate, thank you, Michela and Gitano, for answering the questions in the chat. And if you want to elaborate on any of the topics, feel free. I think actually there was one question that was unanswered in the chat, and it related to your views of the future monetization in games. Anyone care to give an opinion on that?
Selvo, that sounded like kind of one of more your area for the future of monetization there. I mean, we can start our loot box rant, but I think hopefully loot boxes are the past, right?
Yeah, loot boxes were an issue. Of course, we don't have to hide it. Of course, they were an issue, but it seems that the gaming industry is taking some distances from this kind of aggressive monetization. We can call it aggressive monetization approach. We can call it, I mean, what I believe is that loot boxes were an issue just because of the way they were in some way showed, and actually there was actually a very witch hunting in some way. Like a long time ago, it was happening with the violence in video game. I think, as I said, it was an issue, but the social alarm around the loot boxes was not very specific. I mean, for me, it was just a bad game design element, and you should just change the game design. The problem is that sometimes in the specific kind and corner of the industry, specific kind of game design elements, they are necessary because most of the time we are talking about a free-to-play games. So they need in some way to encourage some kind of behavior, because if not, there is not an economic income. But in terms of players' creativity and the monetization, I mean, of course, I do believe that I have a dream. My dream is that in some way publishers and players, they can one day in some way collaborate, and without preventing players to get some recognition, not only economic, but also social recognition, cultural recognition. But I think that the loot boxes was just a mistake in some way for many views, and I think we dealt with it a lot, and I don't think we are going to see so many loot boxes in the future in many games. But the way was the problem was the way they were implemented in the game. This was my opinion in terms of this.
I have a question for Rafael, if he's still here. And it basically relates to the virtual.
I'm here.
Perfect. It relates back to the virtual reality question, and I'm not gonna ask you whether there's a virtual reality version in the works. That's not what I'm gonna do. What I'm gonna ask you though is, there is the possibility of creating a mod to mod the game to make it playable in virtual reality. Would you consider that as any other mod, or would you place it in a special category because of the potential that there is there? Or there will be no difference in treatment with, I don't know, a content add-on, let's say, or any other kind of mod?
So first of all, if anyone joined later, hello, my name is Rafael. I'm from CD Projekt. We make video games. So responding to your question, I'd say, as usually in these, maybe I'll start a bit with the rational. We haven't had a case like this in the past. However, we see that the way how gamers want to exploit, and I mean exploit not in a negative sense, but in an objective sense, IPs, is very, very vast. And sometimes the consequences are very unexpected. And I would say, in general, if we talk about policy of our company, we attempt to protect and support modders whenever it's possible. However, the big problem that we observe with modding in general is that once you say it's okay to use your content, then it spreads and you have no control over it. And as it has been mentioned during the presentation, we, for example, have set certain images of people who, gave their appearances to be used in the game. And it's not only about celebrities, it's also sometimes about CDPR employees or streamers or any other people who later on can be used in a different context. And so, and now jumping into VR, can our game, can it be easily used in the VR section? I don't think so. However, I'm not an expert in this area. Would our response be different? It's hard to tell, because if, as you can observe, our current approach to modders is that in case you want to do something within our environment, then, or outside of the environment, like with Machinima, then we don't have a problem with it. In case you want to use something in a different game, we usually ask people to ask us for their consent. And the main reason why we do it is that it doesn't become a totally separate product as such, because we try to maintain the dichotomy between, if something is a separate product that is commercial with a commercial aim, we have a problem with it. If it's not commercial, then we don't have a problem with it. So I would say if somebody would like to recreate the whole game, a part of the game in a VR thing, in a bit the way how the modders go, I would say it, in my initial idea, because I didn't think about this before the today's presentation. I would say this is something going a bit further than just creating a simple mod. Because, as I said, it is not only about recreating something as an addition to the game, or as a let's say like a small addition to something. But if you create something that's a separate product, this could have a much higher impact on how it would be perceived. I hope I answered your question. It's but as I said, it's not a very, very easy matter.
I see the question on the chat from Nick Campton. He's asking about fictional trademarks. How far do you think publishers will need to clear these marks? I think that's the question to Rafał again, but if you like, all of you can answer.
Yeah, I can elaborate. Hello, Nick. I can elaborate a bit about this. So I'd say the first test, if you're talking to a lawyer and you have a lawyer who claims he or she's working video game business, I'd say testing fictional trademark is one of the first places where you can see if somebody really had a chance to talk with the industry. So just to give you a bit of a background, when we were working on Cyberpunk, we had hundreds of brands that we needed to check. And then I think Kuba Jankowski, who's is still with us, and he was doing the work, so he can, at least in the chat part, say how difficult, irritating, and tiring it was. However, the main issue is if you need to clear, it's time consuming. So the main way how you clear the trademarks for the game, it means that it's impossible to do real trademark checks for every single brand that is in the game, because this would mean that you need to spend, let's say, I'd say one real trademark search for one trademark is usually, I don't know, a few hours, 4 hours. So let's assume you've got like 2,000 brands that you need to check. It means it's impossible, and it's so cost ineffective that it would kill you and the whole department. So the way how you need to approach it is that generally you need to, let's say, make layers and decide and first ask the questions: how important the brand is in the game? What is the scope of usage of the brand? Is it something that's going to be seen only in the background? Are we planning to use it in the dialogue options, and so on and so on? Because then by this you can assess what is the real risk that can be that can arrive, that somebody comes and claims that they have a right to a trademark that is the same, let's say the same name as the fictional one. And I can tell you that in practice, there are like hundreds of very similar or identical brands. And then you're looking at it and you're thinking, what is the potential of being sued by Disney? And you say, okay, Disney is quite a high chance. And then you think, and what's the possibility of being sued by, I don't know, a small carpet producer in Poland who has a similar brand name, but not for exactly the same products? And you need to create this risk assessment to assess how possible it is that the trademark that is fictional for you is really existing for somebody else, is a potential for a lawsuit. And so I'd say if we look on it from the way of clearing the marks for fictional trademark, we've been clearing them, and I think it's very important. However, of course, if you have a whole big set of protections that you have, for example, that there's no risk of confusion, that the other brand is not renowned, but I'd say this is a part of the test that you need to make.
I don't see any other. Oh, there's one. Emanuele Fava asks, do you think in the future we can expect publishers to secure music licenses, allowing streamers to stream third-party, meaning non-original soundtrack music too? Anyone?
Yeah, I can respond. Sorry for me responding over and over again. So the problem we have with IP right now is that on one side, it doesn't protect you well in many cases, in practice. In other cases, the way how it is interpreted is so crazy. I mean, it helps so much people to push aggressively their agenda that it creates a system of a mess. So on one side, there's a lot of stuff that you cannot do which seem like basic, like stopping stuff from being, visible somewhere on torrents or anywhere else. On the other hand, somebody can claim that he or she has a copyright in something that's not really creative. I'm not talking about music, but I'm talking about the general trend that you can observe. And if we watch how the music licensing part has been moving and has been changing on YouTube and other channels, it's visible that in order to protect musicians, what is an important thing, I say, the legal regime is quite strict and rigid. And we have observed situation in some music, for example, somebody who created a cover of a music for The Witcher later on claims IP infringement of their rights for the music when somebody was streaming the original music from The Witcher. And I'd say right now we are somewhere where we need some solutions, because if we would like to have commercial music, I mean, we don't have a problem if music is done in-house, but if you take a license for music usage from the outside, the more kinds of usage you want to use, the more money you need to pay. And the differences are huge. So I would say for a developer, it's impossible to take third-party music and give a right for the streamers to use it in the game, because the cost would be really, really, really huge. So I seriously hope that what we are going to expect is creation of some sort of, let's say, basic licensing scheme for streamers, because I think the market, and by market, I don't want to mean, the evil business market, but by a market, I mean a place where people meet and satisfy their needs. By some people by streaming stuff, the others by watching, is just too big, and this needs some sort of a resolution. Personally, I'm for creating a copyright law that is less stringent and that is more open, and that is that where the exceptions are much higher. So maybe this impacts my interpretation here, because I can imagine musicians would say, hey, we need to have something from this. But I would say that currently the situation, like with us, where we need to turn on and off the streaming, is not something that should be.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, so I think we'll. Oh, Guys, do you have time, or we just should stop it at this point?
So Alex and I actually were right before everything went berserk and all in-person things stopped. I think we were on one of the last in-person panels at Queen Mary on exactly this topic of AI-generated content. It was a good solid hour-and-a-half panel. There were a lot of people on the panel that were smarter than I am. And I think what we mostly got out of that panel were the nice little gift bottles of wine for the speakers, because it's absolutely going to be a game changer, and it's absolutely an area of just complete mystery. Oh, I didn't. Yeah, hi Daniel. I didn't see that you were there, but yeah, it's absolutely an area where we spent a lot of time answering questions like this by going. And I think, I mean, my personal opinion is that I don't see what there is to protect an incentive from a US copyright perspective. You know, the AI's doing this, and AI doesn't need copyright to keep making things.
I mean, from my perspective, while I'm not disputing in any way that AI is going to have a tremendous impact in all industries, not just the video game industry, I'm going to echo what Rafael said. And basically, to me, it's another indication that we have to take a look at copyright again, because the way in which we create, the way in which we share has changed. And by the time we will manage to at least be on par with how creativity has changed up until this point, we are going to be run over by AI, in the sense that the way we create, the way works are generated is going to completely change, and we're going to have some more patchwork to do. And in my view, that's not really going to be manageable, as it was proven over the last 50, 70 years of copyright trying to catch up with technology. So
I mean, this topic, I have just an opinion. I think what is going to happen, I mean, I think that with artificial intelligence generated content, we will add another layer of difficulty, because I'm thinking about, first, I don't know why, but I don't know, is your generated content from artificial intelligence? I imagine there, I picture them very, very high quality and very, very well done. And I'm thinking what is going to happen when this work will be used by other creators in order to create new kind of work, a derivative work for an artificial intelligence work based. So this is gonna add another layer of problem some way. Who's gonna have the copyright? Of course, the artificial intelligence, there is no copyright there. I mean, it's just another, because this word is so easy, so we need something more complicated here. But yes, it's as Mike said, is we don't know. Let's see what happens, because it's impossible to provide answer at the moment.
I'll just add one almost small note regarding the AI. So for me, AI in the entertainment industry is the chance that my childhood dreams would finally come true, meaning that you play in a role-playing game and each character that you meet on the street is a different one. And that the streets that you see, this is not like three people standing in the same positions, but really moving. Cars really driving to other places, and if you follow somebody, you can see somebody, I don't know, going home. And if you talk to somebody, then each person can have a different characteristics on how to approach stuff. So for me, this is something I always dreamt of when I played my, I'd say, favorite RPG of all time, Fallout 2. This was something I felt a bit like when there were so many people who had like very, very good lines written down. But then this could expand into, let's say, an impossible level. But to create an AI that has a strong impact in the entertainment industry, I would look on it from a different perspective. So I'd say to create this, you need to have a very strong team that is dedicated into creating something that, in case, I'd say the effort is a bit too big to create it just for one game. Of course, it's possible to do, but I'd say I can imagine that there can be more and more AI-generated, let's say AI-generated creators that would support in bringing such big cities into lives. And then I would think that in practice, the whole discussion that having about IP would be done a bit the same way how big questions about what video game is, what is the right to virtual currency and stuff is usually done by creating a software license where you just say everything is mine and I don't care what you're doing, but if you create something new using this AI generated content, then it's yours, but you still need to pay me some sort of a royalty. So I'd say we can have a very big discussion on what is the essence and who is actually the creator of the AI, but the market is going to concentrate on one thing: how to put this into the existing framework of law. And I'd say our framework is very, very old-fashioned, as it bases on 19th century concepts.
Just add one more thing about artificial intelligence and creativity. I think it's more helpful to see it as something changing the concept of creativity and how we understand it. It should still be human-centric, as it's interpreted both in the EU and in the US, something that relates to human creators. But we can use AI tools, or we can rely on AI systems to increase or widen our horizons, provide us with combinations that were unforeseen and or unexplored. But I don't think we should seek for the AI to replace the human creator. We should want for the AI to assist us, but not to replace authors as such. I agree there is very little incentive for copyright to support that kind of approach.
Is there any other question? I don't see any. I believe, let's say we have time for one last question, so I'll give you just a moment to ask it, and if there's no, I think we're gonna end our discussion.
Yeah, I think there is a question for Rafael from Daniel in the chat.
So there's a question from Daniel Harvey. He asks about the monetization of Cyberpunk. He says, I understand that CD Projekt Red plans on monetization from DLC, but will they consider new routes of monetization, such as in-game advertisements, as in NBA 2K21, but a more sophisticated version, a battle pass sort of system, or based solely on purchasable cosmetic skins, as in the Marvel Avengers game? And as this game was designed as a single-player game, will the multiplayer element be released as a separate date, as an add-on or complete separate game to increase monetization? I'm not sure if Rafał can answer that, but
I can give some stuff. So regarding multiplayer, it's a bit too early to talk about this, I'd say. The first part of the question is quite interesting, because when you think about video game studios, you need to remember that actually video games are not just video games anymore. I'd say you have different sorts of a market. So you have games that have replaced crosswords and all these kinds of like stuff that my grandmother loved. You have which are like a completely different product from what we do, for example. And you have games that are more like of I'd say a pitch where all people from high school meet and play together some sort of a game. And I'd say Fortnite is something like this. And I would place ourselves, meaning CD Projekt Red, something that's the most near to some sort of emotion that books and cinema gives. So as Mike mentioned during the presentation, creation of a universe that tells a very interesting story. And this means that we are a very much artist-driven company. What does it mean? It means that it's always the artists who have the ultimate say, and they have the final decision on whether we want to include something in the game or not. So even though I cannot disclose the existing ideas that we have for our games and sorts of monetization until they are disclosed. I can say that our approach is that the way how we obtain money is that we sell our games, and this is the main source, and this is the main thing how we want to approach. If there's anything in the game that is from third parties, it is because we think this matches the game creatively. And I say this is the ultimate point, the ultimate target, and we are not a company that is thinking about increasing the ways on how we can approach monetization in terms of our AAA games. Of course, we are observing what's happening in the market, but the general approach is that you pay money and you get something that you wanted, that is full, let's say. So when we're talking about DLCs, I would separate it as it was visible with The Witcher 3. If we were talking about DLCs, meaning like some stuff that is not very big but changes the game and it makes the game more fun, we always were giving this for free to people who are playing our games. And when you think about DLCs, meaning expansions, then an expansion was paid, but it was usually made of a length that's as long as some other full games are. So what we are always approaching is that we want to create something that's complete, and that our fans who want to play our games, they know what they get in reward. And this is, let's say, our perspective and our point of seeing how we want to sell things to fans.
Thank you very much. And I think with that statement, we have to end for tonight. Thank you very much, everyone, for speaking, for your insights. Thank you, Queen Mary University of London. Thank you, Gaetano, Michela, Salvo, Alex, Mike. It was impressive. Thank you, Rafa, for your comments. We can all say that video games and interactive entertainment in general is a especially complex matter, and I think we can be optimistic that there are some answers there, but we just have to look for them, right? And with that thought, I think we can end. Thank you. I almost forgot. I thank you, Steve, for providing the platform from the British Law Center. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to be here tonight. Dziękuję bardzo. Wieczór dobry.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Goodbye. Good
You
night.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.